Hey there, folks. Today is Sunday, March 15th, 2026. And things are bad in a lot of ways, and a variety of places all across the country and around the world. Things are not great right now. In fact, things are pretty terrible. One example of things being terrible: the cold water terror group appears to be escalating things in Vermont. Vermont is home to less than 1% of the country's immigrants. Less than 1%. Seems to be an act of political retribution, much like what was done to Minneapolis and Minnesota, where the future and the wellness of that state was extremely harmed by ethnic cleansing. Now they're escalating things in Vermont, including arresting people from inside of their home who hadn't committed any crimes, weren't named on any warrants, weren't immigrants. Apparently, allegedly, someone who they were trying to get, the ICE agents were trying to get, took shelter in those people's home, is what the agents alleged in their court filing to get a warrant. But when they served that warrant and entered the home, the person was not there. So they took the homeowners instead, who weren't named on the warrant, who hadn't committed any crimes. They were dragged from their home, taken into custody. As far as I know, they still haven't been charged. So things are bad in Vermont. Things are still bad in Minnesota. People are sheltering in their homes. You know, there's a wave of evictions that are anticipated, so the city council is trying to get an eviction moratorium to push back the evictions to 60 days out instead of 30 days out. Give people a chance to recover from the ethnic cleansing in Minneapolis, but the mayor, Jacob Frey, vetoed that move, putting who knows how many thousands of people at risk for homelessness because of the federal agency's tactics. So things are still bad in Minnesota. Obviously, things are not good in Iran. It's come out that the Tomahawk strike on the girls' school was a double tap strike. So it's been reported that 4 Tomahawk missiles were sent at that school, and the initial strike was of 3 of the Tomahawks, while the 4th loitered above the school gathering damage assessment information. Then, when the first responders and the teachers and parents rushed to the scene to try to recover their school children, that's when the double tap 4th Tomahawk missile struck the first responders, parents, and teachers. So it's also being reported that that school was the school for high-ranking Iranian military leaders' children. So they struck at the daughters of the Iranian military is what that strike was. It has all of the hallmarks of a purposeful attack on civilian infrastructure, specifically on the children of military leaders. And it's going to come out eventually whether or not they purposefully attacked school children, but it seems as though that was the purpose of this attack, that they knew it was home to the daughters of high-ranking military leaders. So things are bad over there in Iran. They're not reporting on it in the United States military. They don't want in the United States media, because they don't want the military to lose morale. You know, it could be a national security threat to report on the truth of what's actually going on abroad. But there's reports that the green zone is being evacuated in Baghdad, that the military personnel, American military personnel, are being evacuated from Baghdad, that the green zone has been struck by a drone, and there's video of fire coming from the green zone. And there's plenty of videos of troops being evacuated from surrounding nations, whether it's Bahrain, Jordan, United Arab Emirates, all these areas in and around the Middle East. They're evacuating the troops. They're getting them out because the ability for these anti-aircraft devices to protect the soldiers is being overburdened by the barrages sent by Iran. So they're doing these massive missile barrages and massive drone barrages, and there are so many of them that the only safe option for the US is to withdraw. So there's been a massive withdrawal of soldiers, and that's very, very telling. And yet you also see images of the soldiers being given their steak and lobster dinners. Okay, so on one hand, they're taking the active duty soldiers from inside of military bases in the area of operation out, and on the other hand, they have the stateside soldiers being given their pre-combat meals. So they're doing a lot of pushing around the concept of war and boots on the ground in Iran. So all that is terrible. In my opinion, there's nothing good about that. It's just devastating in the price that we're paying in munitions and lives, and it's devastating the cost that's being paid by the people of these countries, whether it's in Iran or Yemen, Bahrain, or anywhere over there. And it's terrible. It's terrible. So another example of what is terrible that's going on in New Mexico, Zorro Ranch, one of the properties owned by Jeffrey Epstein. His estate sold it to a Texas billionaire, or maybe just millionaire, pardon me, but sold the Zorro Ranch to this Catholic who allegedly was going to create a retreat there, but who has not filed for any permits for retreats nor have they filed for any construction permits, and yet drone video and satellite images show, plus actual reports and fines and ticketing show that Zorro Ranch has been home to multiple construction projects, including the complete digging up of the labyrinth and shrub garden. You can look at the Google Maps, and there used to be a shrub garden with this big hedge maze, you know, convenient place for planting things that you don't want dug up. And apparently the new owner has completely dug it up. Not only have they completely dug it up, but they've dug it up to such an extent that Google Maps can illustrate the depth of the pit created by the hole that they dug to displace all of those plants and shrubs. And that's not the only location that has been dug up. There's also a horse corral and just random outbuildings that have been demolished and made into giant holes in the ground. So, you know, the implication is that there was something to hide, because otherwise, why wouldn't they file for a permit? Why would they do these massive excavation projects without a permit? Why would the brand new owner of a potential crime scene do massive excavation projects without a permit? It's just a question that rattles around in my mind. But the state of New Mexico allegedly is doing an investigation into the Zorro Ranch and has been there searching with the permission of the new owner, only after a huge court fight where the new owner resisted the inspection and investigation for a long time. But the Zorro Ranch is not the only Epstein property where there could be people's remains hidden, because he also owned property in Minnesota near Mankato, or maybe near Duluth. I think near Duluth, now that I say it. But there was a huge scandal around that property because it was involved directly with sex trafficking, and under the supervision of a pageant owner, and also I believe it was Calvin Klein CEO, or maybe it was either Victoria's Secret or Abercrombie and Fitch. I think it was Abercrombie and Fitch. It was one of these guys who has a reputation for being disgusting and using their wealth and influence to sex traffic humans. And they sex trafficked men out of a mansion over there in Minnesota. So the Zorro Ranch is not the only Epstein property that should be investigated. There's also properties that were in Paris, London, New York, and then obviously, like I said, Minnesota and New Mexico, among many, many others. You own properties all around the country and around the world, but they've done only very limited investigations to small portions of the country. I don't think it's incidental that they've given so much lag time between knowing the obscene and monstrous behaviors of Epstein and the time at which they've done any investigation of his homes. It's not incidental. It's not like, oops, we slipped and forgot that he had potentially remains of human beings buried at his home. So, the files, as they're being examined it's becoming more and more clear the depths of the depravity that these people were stooping to and how horrific their behaviors actually were. You know, things are really bad when you start looking at that, because again, there's only been 2 arrests. One from a person who allegedly took their own lives, and one of a woman, but there's scads of influential, wealthy men named in those files who could easily be implicated and have been named by the survivors. So here we have all of these men and women survivors who were trafficked, that have named the names, have shown up in court, who have done their part to try and make accountable the perpetrators of crimes against them. And over again, the mechanisms of justice, of accountability, have kind of shrugged their shoulders and given a collective meh to the behaviors of these depraved lunatics. And I use that term inappropriately to refer to degenerates. It's terrifying. It's terrifying. It's just terrifying. They're talking about like eating children, you know, all the stuff that the QAnon conspiracy theorists were going on about. It turns out was actually true. It's in the Epstein files. It's been reported to the FBI. It's just that they don't want to take any action on it. They're basically allowing the entitled class of depraved, you know, cannibalistic sex fiend to do the worst things to human beings. It's terrifying. It's terrifying because there's been zero accountability of any of these men who are doing these things. And they're named over and over again. And the agencies who are allegedly responsible for enforcing these types of laws are just doing nothing. They're just doing nothing. They're just, you know, they're just letting these people go who have done the most terrible things, and they continue to do terrible things. So, you know, obviously the survivors of the Epstein for the survivors of the Epstein files, things are bad. It's humiliating and disgusting that we can have troves of evidence and yet nothing is done. So yeah, things are definitely bad in that area. You know, when it comes to, let's call it what it is, ethnic cleansing, things are really bad when it comes to ethnic cleansing, because they're ramping up facilities to detain people in. They're creating more and more of these warehouses and essentially concentration camps to detain people. And they're detaining people often with no criminal records and obviously without warrant or cause, based purely on suspicion from looking at a person. They've decided that by looking at a person, that's enough to determine that person's potential for being a criminal immigrant. And it's part of what makes it absurd is that this is the definition of what do you call it? Not stereotyping. There's another word for it in law enforcement, where you make a generalized assertion just by looking at people. So, you know, they're violating people's constitutional rights, is what they're doing. They're doing constitutional violations by, you know, circumventing due process and just stereotyping people and taking into custody Haitians and Latinos based just on their appearance, based just upon their accent. it's what they're calling a Kavanaugh arrest or a Kavanaugh search, because now under the Supreme Court, it's basically okay to do stereotyping. I wish I could remember that word, but it's the word for just looking at a person and arresting them based on their looks, not based on their behaviors. So, they're arresting all of these people, and they're ending up with people who are actually American-born citizens, who are straight up born in the U.S. They're just of Haitian or Latino descent, and they might have an accent, whether it's Creole or Haitian accent or a Latino Hispanic accent, and they're arresting them based purely on that, and people are ending up dead in custody because they're not giving them adequate care. Now, there have been investigations based on 911 calls from these facilities because the agents don't have the adequate resources to respond to medical emergencies. So people are going into medical emergency inside of these detention centers, and the agents are underprepared to respond. And their only and best response is just to call 911. So they end up on the phone with the county emergency center, and as a result of it, there's all of these public documents. So the journalists are getting into the public documents based on 911 calls. There have been fights, attempted suicide, sexual assault, sickness, all kinds of like measles and tuberculosis. There's just like, people are unwell in these facilities. They're dangerous, and people are dying inside of them. They're overcrowded, and they're all being managed for profit. So at the end of the day, these facilities are being operated this way in an effort to put money in the pockets of shareholders. It's not out of efficiency of the process to improve the country's wellness or the safety and security of the detainees. No, they're doing all this just in an effort to make more money for their shareholders. So you have, people in these cells without mattresses, just concrete benches and Mylar blankets, being served expired food. It's moldy, it's got maggots in it, and it's causing people to become sick. Meanwhile, the people who survive these concentration camps come out the other side having lost 30 pounds because they don't even get enough of the horrible food that they are given. That the people who are being held in these facilities are going to have lifelong consequences just from the dietary suffering that was imposed on them. That's to say nothing of the mental health fatigue caused by 24-hour lights on and no place to ever get comfortable, no privacy to use the restroom or take a shower. So like the basic 3 pillars of human sanity, adequate food, adequate rest, and a sense of security, are all stripped from people inside of these detainee cells, because at any moment they could be pulled from the cell and assaulted by one of these troglodytes, these frickin' Neanderthal, which is doing a disservice to a genome that had a prime. These horrific fascists that are guarding these cells, they now have what they're calling blue butterfly cells, where they're keeping minor girls. They're keeping pregnant girls in isolation blocks where they're kept to themselves, away from any press, away from family, away from any kind of medical observers or any help. They're sequestered, and only these sicko detainee prison guards have access to them. And this is in Texas, where there is no such thing as legal abortion, even where rape is involved. And we know that the children in ICE custody are being raped. So, you know, this is terrible, terrible news. I can't believe that that is the reality in our country, but it's been that way for a long time now. It just doesn't get talked about. You know, when you have a commander-in-chief who's accustomed to being able to eat little children, there's, you know, now Iran is releasing pictures and videos from the Epstein files that the media won't release, which shows Dawn with a whole bunch of little kids. You know, it came out the other day that if you search the Epstein files for the word don't, like D-O-N-T, don't, it's all redacted. Every instance of the word don't is redacted, because whoever was going through and redacting the Epstein files went through and got rid of every instance of the name Dawn. And if you read Dawn with apostrophe T, it's don't. So they just went through and redacted every instance of the word don't in case it might accidentally expose Don T to any kind of ridicule for his behavior towards small children. So again, this person who treats little children in such a horrific way has now got series of concentration camps where children, little girls, are being sequestered away from the public's eye. I mean, things are really bad inside of ICE concentration camps. So, you know, I really need to do more of these videos. I need to be online more often, putting out content, and I appreciate you guys taking the time to tune in. I'm gonna let you go, and I'll get in touch again very soon.